I am Camila Reed, 38. And for 5 years I kept my parents' house warm and bright with payments no one saw until the week of Thanksgiving when the emails never came. The family drive locked me out, and my father left a message that said, "Your mother and I have agreed you are not welcome at Thanksgiving." I opened my spreadsheets and receipts. A recording later proved they called me convenient, not family, and on the eve of Thanksgiving I turned off the autopay that had quietly carried them, and as the due dates arrived, the oven stalled. The lights died, the catering card failed, and the room that erased me finally learned who kept it running. This is not a tantrum, it is a boundary. And if you stay with me, I will show you the proof that silence became the price of being convenient, and how choosing peace can sound like a house going dark. At lunch, I opened my laptop on the kitchen table of my apartment. The fan ticked above, too loud in the quiet. I clicked the shared family drive, the folder we had filled with menus and playlists year after year. A red message spread across the screen, access denied. I tried again, then a bookmarked link, denied. The digital door that always swung open was shut in my face. My phone buzzed, Dad's name lit the screen. For half a second I felt like a child again, waiting for him to pick me up from practice. I opened the message. "We have all agreed you are not welcome at Thanksgiving." That was it. No, sorry, no hope you understand, just cold words shaped like a verdict. I stared at the message, hoping I had misread. I hadn't. I placed the phone on the table and sat very still. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the heater. A memory surfaced, unwelcome but sharp. The last Thanksgiving I attended, Austin traffic had made me late. My casserole cooled in the seat beside me. When I walked in arms full, Caroline looked up from her phone and said, "Late arrivals eat standing." Dad didn't look up at all when he added that if you show up late, you show up last. Laughter rose around the table. I ate by the sink, telling myself it was nothing, just holiday stress. I picked the phone up again, read the message once more, then took a screenshot. Proof. Not for anyone else, but for me. I made a folder on my desktop and slid the image inside. Evidence makes the truth hold still. I tried to work, but the spreadsheets blurred. Numbers usually soothe me, but not that day. I closed the laptop and walked to the window. Across the lot, a couple carried pumpkins inside. Ordinary life moved forward. My own had stopped. I am 38 years old, I thought, and I know the difference between a misunderstanding and a decision. This was a decision. That evening, the group thread disappeared from my phone. Not muted, not archived, gone. I scrolled until my thumb ached, but it wasn't there. Out of habit, I opened Facebook. The first post was my cousin Kayla smiling in my parents' dining room, a glass raised, around her 12 familiar faces. My mother's hand rested on her shoulder like a coronation. The caption read, "Doing what is best for the family is not always easy." My chest tightened. The chandelier above them was the same one I had helped Mom pick out years ago when the old fixture sparked. Now it glowed over a table with no place for me. I shut the app, set the phone far from me, and poured a cup of coffee I didn't want. Holding something warm kept my hands from shaking. I stared at the surface until it stilled, then carried it to the table. The ceiling fan ticked overhead. Much later, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification blinked. I froze, knowing exactly what it would be. I paced the apartment, then sat down and pressed play. Dad's voice filled the room, flat and practiced. "We have all agreed you are not welcome at Thanksgiving." No stumble, no hesitation, no trace of regret. Just the same verdict spoken out loud. The words lodged heavier in my chest than the text had. Hearing them made it real in a way letters on the screen never could. When the message ended, I saved it immediately. Proof again. I renamed the file with the date, made sure it backed up. I treated it the way you treat a deed or a contract, something you cannot risk losing. I thought about printing a transcript, sliding it onto the shelf where I kept other documents of survival. Paid bills, settled disputes, small pieces of paper that said, "Yes, this happened. You are not imagining it." I didn't print it, but the thought comforted me. I washed the coffee mug, set it on the rack, and powered down the laptop. The apartment darkened around me. I set my phone face down on the nightstand, screen black, red dots still glowing beneath the glass. I pulled a blanket over me on the couch and lay staring at the ceiling. Outside, a car door slammed and footsteps faded. The heater hummed. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a different message. One that said, "We saved you a seat." One that said, "We're waiting for you." But the picture dissolved quickly. All I had was the day I lived, the proof I had saved, and the sense that tomorrow I would need both. I remember the drive that year as if it is still pressed into my shoulders. Austin traffic was backed up from a wreck on the interstate, brake lights stretching for miles. By the time I pulled into Willow Bend, the sun had already dropped and the windows of my parents' house glowed with the yellow of a holiday gathering, already underway. In the passenger seat, the casserole I had baked before dawn had cooled in its foil pan. I carried it awkwardly, the smell of sage and cream still clinging. My other arm looped with a bag of rolls I had picked up from a bakery near the office. When I stepped inside the door, the noise of voices and silverware was already full and loud. Coats were piled high on the entry bench, shoes scattered like the party had started hours ago. I moved quickly through the hall, balancing the casserole, hoping someone would notice me, maybe call my name. No one did. In the kitchen, every surface was crowded. Pies in their tins, salad bowls already half empty, bottles of wine sweating on the counter. My sister Caroline stood near the stove, her phone propped against a jar while she recorded a video of the spread. She looked up when she saw me, her smile sharp. "Late arrivals eat standing," she said, voice pitched just enough to carry. I tried to laugh it off, setting the casserole carefully at the edge of the counter. But my father's voice cut through before I could speak. "If you show up late, you show up last." He didn't look at me when he said it. Just kept carving the turkey while the cousins chuckled. The sound of their laughter filled the kitchen like steam. I glanced around for a chair, but everyone was taken. My mother busied herself pouring gravy into a china boat. Avoiding my eyes, no one shifted, no one made space. For a second I considered asking, but the words stuck. I took a paper plate, spooned some food, and stood by the sink. The faucet dripped steadily beside me as I ate. From the dining room I could hear the rhythm of conversation, the rising and falling hum of a group that did not need me. Caroline floated between rooms with her phone, narrating the night for her followers. When she passed by the kitchen again, she cast me a quick look that was part smirk, part performance. I focused on my plate, on the cool mashed potatoes and the casserole that now seemed invisible among the rest. Aunt Linda brushed past me to rinse her hands and said without thinking that the rolls were good. I opened my mouth to say I had bought them, but she was already gone, carrying them back to the table to be passed around with someone else's name attached. I leaned against the counter, the plate balanced in one hand, the other steadying me. My back ached from the drive. My eyes burned from the effort of holding everything together. No one noticed. The toast was raised without me, glasses clinked in the next room, and the sound slid under the door like something meant to remind me of my place. I finished eating quickly, rinsed the plate, and set it on the rack. I thought about leaving, then driving back into the dark, but pride kept me in the kitchen washing dishes I hadn't dirtied, folding napkins that weren't mine. It gave me something to do, something to keep my hands busy while my chest felt hollow. Later that night, as people began to gather coats and search for car keys, I stood near the back door with my casserole dish cleaned and wrapped in foil. Caroline laughed with her friends. Kayla posed for photos beside the pie she had bought from a store. My father shook hands. My mother kissed cheeks. And not once did anyone ask if I had eaten, if I was tired, if I had driven far. The drive back to my apartment was silent. I turned off the radio because even the music felt too heavy. The casserole dish sat on the seat beside me, empty and cool. I kept telling myself families get stressed, that holidays are chaotic, that it was nothing. But in the quiet of the car, I knew better. That night was the first time I understood that I could bring food, gifts, even money, and still be treated as if my presence was optional. The house that had once been warm enough to cover every mistake had become a place where I was tolerated, not welcomed. I held on to that memory even when I tried to forget it, because it told the truth I kept trying not to see. I set the dish down on my kitchen counter when I got home, washed it, dried it, and slid it back into the cabinet. Then I sat in the dark with only the hum of the refrigerator for company. That was the night I stopped crying over being left out. It was also the night I started to understand what it meant to stand in the middle of your own family and feel invisible. The memory returned sharper after Dad's text this year. It was no longer a small wound I could smooth away. It was a mark carved deep, proof that long before the message, the erasure had already begun. I opened the folder on my laptop that I usually avoid, the one where I keep the spreadsheets that map out my life in dollars and dates. The cursor hovered before I clicked, and the file opened in neat rows of black and white. The numbers were steady and merciless. January 2018 mortgage payment $1,550. February 2018 $1,550. March 2018 $1,550. Line after line, month after month, the same figure pulled from my account with a kind of loyalty I had never received back. I scrolled further. 48 months lined up like soldiers, 4 years of my life measured in tidy cells. By the time I reached the end, the total glared at me. Over $90,000 gone, siphoned into a house that did not have my name on it. A house where my place at the table was never guaranteed. I leaned back in the chair, pressing my palms to my eyes. My chest felt tight as if the numbers were bricks stacked inside me. I remembered every conversation I had skipped dinner for, every shift I had taken at Lone Star Mutual just to be sure that payment cleared on the first of the month. Vacations I had turned down, shoes I had never bought. The careful way I watched the grocery bill because that mortgage came first. I opened the second tab labeled Utilities. Gas, electricity, internet. $321 one month, $340 the next. Another $4,000 each year on top of the mortgage. Each one set to autopay, each one quietly pulling from my account so the lights in Willow Bend stayed bright and the Wi-Fi never failed. I stared at the confirmation emails attached to each payment. My name at the top, my card number ending in 4403. Every bill carried me in its lines, but no one ever asked if it was too heavy. The memory of the day Dad asked me to co-sign surfaced sharp. We were in the kitchen, the smell of coffee thick in the air. He leaned against the counter casual, like he was asking me to pick up milk. The bank just needs a little reassurance, Camila. It is nothing permanent. Once things stabilize, we will refinance and take you off. He waved his hand as if it was a detail too small to matter. I was 33 then, still believing promises carried weight if they came from your father. I drove him downtown that afternoon. The bank office smelled of printer ink and carpet cleaner. I sat across from a loan officer who slid the papers toward me. I signed where the tabs told me to. I remember glancing at the top line where ownership was listed. David Reed, sole borrower. My name appeared lower down, co-borrower, the second voice that made the loan possible, but held no claim to the house itself. I told myself it was fine, that it was temporary. Now the memory twisted in my gut. I pulled the scanned document up on my screen. Black letters stark on white. Owner David Reed. Co-borrower Camila Reed. No place for me on the deed, no protection, no reward, just an obligation. I traced the words with my finger on the glass, as if that could change them. I stood and paced the room, the hardwood creaking under my steps. My reflection in the dark window looked unfamiliar, harder than I remembered. I thought about every birthday party in that house where the lights glowed because I had paid for them. Every dinner my parents hosted where the oven ran all night, powered by my account. Every photo Caroline posted of cozy family nights, the Wi-Fi steady because I had covered it. I was never thanked, never even mentioned. The assumption was simple and cruel. Camila will handle it. I sat again and opened my emails, searching for the word confirmation. Pages of results stacked up. Mortgage confirmation, utility confirmation, insurance confirmation. I clicked through them quickly, like flipping through old photographs. Each one proof of a sacrifice that no one wanted to remember. I thought about printing them, stacking them in a binder labeled with my name, just to see what it looked like when years of effort were collected in one place. The anger rose quickly, then cooled into something heavier. Clarity. I had built a financial spine for a family that did not hesitate to cut me out. I had made myself indispensable only to discover they considered me replaceable. The contradiction made my hands shake. I shut the laptop and pressed my palms flat on the cool table. The numbers were still there behind my eyelids. $90,000 in mortgage, $17,000 in utilities. Not even counting groceries and gifts. A ledger of a life spent carrying a house I was not welcome in. I walked to the drawer where I keep physical copies of important documents and pulled out the loan papers, crisp and stamped with a notary's seal. I read them again, slower this time. Each clause is another nail locking me into a role I had never truly chosen. The paper felt heavier than it should. I thought of Dad's hand on my shoulder that day at the bank, the way he smiled at the officer and called me dependable. I thought of the way Caroline laughed about her growing audience while I checked my account balance to be sure autopay would not bounce. I thought of Mom arranging flowers in the dining room, never once asking if it was hard for me to keep everything afloat. The silence in my apartment pressed in. Outside, a car drove by with bass rattling through the street. Inside, all I could hear was the steady thud of my own heart. The numbers had stripped away every excuse I had made for them. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a system one I had allowed myself to be part of. I slid the papers back into the folder, closed the drawer, and sat at the table again. The weight did not lift, but it settled into something I could hold. The truth was on paper now undeniable, and I could not unsee it. I had carried their house for years. The least I owed myself was to admit it. I turned off the lamp and let the apartment fall into shadow. My laptop screen went dark, reflecting a faint outline of my face. I stared at it for a long time before standing to lock the door. The night felt colder than usual when I pulled the blanket over me, but the numbers stayed hot in my chest. Proof that silence could lie, but math never did. I opened Facebook on a Sunday afternoon because silence makes me think too much. The app bloomed into color and noise, and there it was at the top of my feed. Kayla in a cinnamon sweater standing in my parents' dining room, head tipped just so, holding a wine glass like a prop. The caption said something about family doing everything together. The kind of sentence that feels generous until you notice who is missing. From the picture, I pinched to zoom without thinking. The frame widened just enough to catch details that most people would scroll past. The table runner with embroidered leaves that I had ordered from a small shop in Vermont the year Dad said the dining room needed to look grown up. The porcelain plates with the thin navy ring that I had bought during a sale because Mom always liked a clean rim. The flatware that had arrived in 3 shipments because the warehouse kept sending the wrong size. All of it gleaming in the soft light of the chandelier I helped choose when the old one buzzed. Pieces of my quiet work arranged to tell a story that did not have my name in it. I scrolled through the comments. Hearts and exclamation points and praise for the spread. People asked for recipes, and Caroline answered as if she had planned the whole thing. Her voice had the breezy confidence she uses on her blog. She called the table effortless. She talked about a tradition she loved hosting with our parents. I felt my jaw tighten and forced my shoulders to drop. None of it was new. It still landed like a fresh bruise. Dad stood in the background of one photo hand on Kayla's shoulder, smiling the way he smiles for other people. He looked proud, the kind of proud that erases the messy parts he does not want to explain. The words under the photo thanked everyone who helped. Names of cousins, neighbors, a tag for the bakery. Not a syllable for the person who paid the bills that kept the lights bright while they posed. A notification popped up. New comment on Kayla's post? It was Nathan. He wrote that sometimes a hard decision is necessary. The likes appeared under his sentence like little seals of approval. I watched them tick upward and felt something in me flatten. People love a narrative that explains away cruelty as courage. I took a screenshot, then another. I saved them in a folder I had created after Dad's message, a place where I put things I did not want to argue with later. The files slipped into place in a row. I named them with the date and the time because clear labels make me feel steady. Curiosity pushed me to Instagram next. Caroline had stitched a short reel from the same night. The camera skimmed over platters and hands reaching for bread and glasses, touching the air. Music played softly underneath. She used a string of hashtags that made my stomach turn. Family table. Gratitude, homemade. She pinned a comment at the top that asked who designed the tablescape. She replied that she did. People told her she had an eye. I watched the reel again with the sound off and noticed my runner. My plates, my candlesticks. It looked like a catalog spread. It also looked like a theft. I set the phone down and went to the cabinet above the fridge where I keep old receipts in a zippered pouch. I found the invoice for the table runner because I knew its weight in my hand. I found the email order for the plates and printed the confirmation that showed my card and the delivery to Willow Bend. The stack grew until it felt ridiculous. Proof for a jury that would never be called. I slid everything into a manila folder and wrote a single word across the tab table. When I sat again, the apartment was almost too quiet. I opened the screenshots and looked at them the way you look at map pins. They formed a clean arc. Years of public posts where my contributions were recast as a group, effort, or a charming stroke of luck. It is easy to pretend that decor appears from nowhere when someone else is creating the conditions for the magic. I had always thought if I did the steady work, they would eventually see me. I stared at the grid of images and accepted that the work itself had become the hiding place. The phone buzzed and I almost ignored it. Kayla had added a new album. I clicked before I could talk myself out of it. The cover image showed a wide shot of the dining room. The chandelier cast warm circles across the table like a blessing. The caption called it a year of gratitude and kindness. In one photo, Caroline held up a pie with her name attached. In another, Dad pulled the turkey from the oven and everyone cheered. I stopped at a picture of my mother pouring wine for a guest while the autumn runner glowed beneath their hands. She looked at ease, which is a rare thing for her in a house full of people. I felt something catch in my throat that was not anger. It was the ache of wanting to be good and also wanting to be seen. I tried to be reasonable with myself. Maybe they did not think about who bought what. Maybe credit feels like a small thing to people who have never had it. Withheld. The thoughts dissolved as soon as they formed. I remembered how Caroline curates her feed. She tags the florist for a bouquet and the bakery for the bread. She knows where things come from when she wants to know. I messaged myself a note with 3 words: public erasure documented. It looked dramatic on the screen, so I deleted it and typed a simpler sentence: keep everything. Then I forwarded the album link to my own email so I could archive it. I felt like a detective in my own life, collecting pieces of a story other people had truncated. I closed the apps and let the phone rest. Outside, the sky over Austin had gone soft gray, the kind of light that makes everything look flat. I stood by the window and watched a cyclist ride past with a paper bag, balanced on the handlebars. The scene grounded me. People were living their lives, picking up dinner, going home. Mine had narrowed to a rectangle of glass where I watched myself be, erased in real time. The thing about public narratives is that they build walls around a lie. Once a group agrees on a story, anyone who contradicts it looks unkind. I could feel that trap snapping shut around me. Family first, be gracious, do not make a scene. The old rules rattled in the back of my mind like coins in a jar. I breathed in and let them pass. The truth did not require me to be quiet. I went back to the folder on my laptop and added a new document. A simple list. Items I had bought for the house with dates and costs. A table runner from a Vermont shop, $68, ordered October 2 years ago. Porcelain plates, $236 during spring sale. Flatware set, $190, replaced salad forks the following month. Candlesticks from a vintage store off Burnett Road, $45 cash. I wrote until the list felt complete, then I saved it and closed the file. It was not about the money. It was about drawing a clean line between what happened and how it was presented. My phone lit up one more time. A direct message from a high school friend who still follows Caroline. She sent a link to the reel with a note that said, "Your sister is killing it this season." I typed a polite heart and a thanks and did not explain anything. There are some explanations that only drain you. I shut down the apps and put the phone face down. The apartment returned to its quiet state, the hum of the heater, the faint traffic beyond the window. I poured water into a glass and drank it slowly, feeling the cold spread through my chest. I thought of the next step without naming it. If the public story had decided I did not exist, I would need a different kind of proof. I rinsed the glass and set it in the sink and let the room be still. The day had been full enough. Tomorrow could carry the private part of the truth. My phone buzzed while I was sorting receipts at the kitchen table. A text from Tammy slid into view. She wrote that she had something I needed to hear. My first instinct was to tell her not to get involved. Then another message arrived with a small gray bar and a file size and a simple line that said, "Play this when you are alone." I set the receipts aside and closed the blinds until the room felt smaller and safer. I turned the volume low and pressed play. For a second, all I heard was the hum of a refrigerator and the clink of glassware. Then a voice I knew far too well cut through the background. "Caroline, bright, smooth, certain. She said I was cold. She said everything I did felt calculated. She said I always needed applause just for being decent." There was a ripple of laughter I could not place. Another voice followed. My mother. Softer in public, but in that room without an audience she sounded steady and sure. She said I was not really family. She said I was convenient. The word landed with a dull thud that echoed across my chest. Convenient. Not daughter, not sister, convenient. As if I were a light switch someone flipped when they needed a glow and ignored it when the room was bright enough. Then my father spoke. He did not raise his voice, he never does. He suggested keeping my name on the loan because it kept things clean. He said there was no reason to change anything that worked. Do not stir the pot. That was the shape of what he said. The clip ended on a scrape of chair legs and a door closing. Silence filled my apartment so fast I had to set the phone down to breathe. I walked to the sink and ran the tap until the water went cold. I cupped my hands and drank as if that would calm the shakiness in my arms. I pressed my palms to the counter and counted to 10. Then I hit play again. The second time I listened to the room. Someone tapped a spoon against a bowl. A chair creaked. Wind pressed against a window. The sounds grounded me. I was not imagining their words. They lived on a file I could pause and replay. I saved the audio to my desktop and named it with the date. I moved it into the folder where I had started keeping my evidence. Frozen accounts. I opened a blank document and typed a short transcript while the file played again. Caroline called me cold and calculated. Mom reduced me to convenience. Dad framed my name on the mortgage as a tool. I wrote it in simple lines because simple lines are hard to argue with. When I finally texted Tammy back, my hands had steadied. I thanked her. She responded quickly. She said she had recorded the conversation at the house because she could not keep pretending she did not hear the way they talked about me. She said she was there, and in Texas, one-party consent applies. She said she hated that it came to this. I told her I understood. I promised I would not say where the file came from. She asked me to be careful. She said they were tightly wound and would lash out if they felt cornered. I told her I was done standing in corners. I sat on the edge of the couch and let the file play one more time, not because I needed to be convinced, but because hearing the words again changed something in me. For years I had been generous with doubt. Maybe I misread that look. Maybe I made a big deal out of nothing. Maybe they were stressed. Doubt was a story I told myself to keep the peace. The recording set a match to that story. It confirmed what the numbers had already told me. I was carrying them because it was convenient for them that I do so. I tried to remember the exact day Dad asked me to sign the loan. I could not recall the date, but I could feel the tone. It had been casual by design. He made responsibility sound like a small favor. Keep your name on it for a while. We will fix it later. Later stretched for years. In the audio, he called the same arrangement clean. Not fair, not kind. Clean. The word tasted like dust. I stood and paced the room. I thought of how public life made Caroline look effortlessly generous. She credits the florist for a bouquet and the bakery for a pie and tags Elle Chou brand for a linen napkin. She knows how to contribute when it serves her image. In the private room of that recording, she turned me into a flaw in the paint, something to be smoothed over. I felt heat behind my eyes and blinked it back. I have learned that I think more clearly when I let my body catch up to the truth. I sat again and opened my list of steps. It was a simple document I had started after Dad's text. Collect public proof, confirm private proof, review finances, decide. The second line was now complete. I added one more item under it. Safeguard the file. I made a copy in cloud storage and emailed it to an account I rarely use. I wrote a short note to myself and attached the audio. A paper trail that did not depend on any single device. Tammy called without warning, and I answered on the second ring. Her voice was small, like she was speaking from inside a closet. She said she had to make it quick. She said the gathering had started as menu planning and turned into a strategy meeting about me. She said Caroline led it like a brand pitch. She said Dad anchored it with practical language that made the plan sound responsible. She said Mom agreed in a way that made no room for doubt. She asked if I hated her for recording it. I told her no. I told her I was grateful. She exhaled and said she could not stand by anymore. She asked again for discretion. I promised again. After we hung up, I opened the audio and listened to the first 30 seconds. The sound of an ice cube in a glass. The scrape of a chair on tile. The slant of my father's voice. I hit stop. I did not need to memorize it. Knowing it existed was enough. I took a legal pad from the drawer and wrote a single sentence in ink. They chose convenience over me. I underlined the words and tore the sheet free and taped it inside the cabinet where I keep the coffee. Not as a monument, but as a reminder to myself in the mornings when habits try to soften history. Outside, a siren wailed and faded down South Lamar. The sky over Austin had gone the color of slate, and the first streetlights blinked on. I stood at the window with my hands on the sill and felt the tight band around my ribs loosen a fraction. Proof does not make pain smaller. It only makes the path forward clearer. I closed the blinds and turned on the lamp. The room warmed by a few degrees. I checked the file again and the backup. I closed the folders and placed the phone face down. I did not write to anyone in my family. There was nothing to ask that the audio had not already answered. There was nothing to explain that they had not already dismissed. I washed my face in the bathroom and caught my reflection. My expression was calmer than I expected, not triumphant, not broken. Just aligned. The story I had been telling myself was over. The one the numbers and the recording wrote together had begun. I dried my face and left the light on behind me. The apartment was still. I could feel the next step approaching like a front moving in. Steady and cold. I let the quiet settle and let my body rest inside it. Tomorrow I will need my full attention. I sat at my desk that night with the lamp casting a small circle of light across the table. My laptop screen glowed against the dim room. I opened the folder on the desktop and renamed it with a finality that made my hands pause. Frozen accounts. I dragged in the mortgage statements, the utilities spreadsheets, screenshots of payments, the audio file Tammy had sent, the photos from Kayla's post. Icons lined up in neat rows like witnesses waiting to testify. The air in the apartment was cold and still, but my palms were damp. I opened my banking app first. The login page asked for credentials I could type without looking. When the dashboard appeared, the familiar rows of transactions filled the screen. Every mortgage payment on time, every utility bill cleared. I clicked into the settings for autopay. There was a button green and solid. I hovered, then I pressed. The confirmation flashed, autopay disabled. I sat back and let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. I had not missed a payment in 4 years. Now the system would wait for me, and I would not arrive. I moved to the electric company. The balance read 0 as it should, because my account had always paid ahead. I scrolled until I found the section for payment preferences. Another green toggle, another click. A message appeared asking if I wanted to remove the stored card. Yes. Confirmation email arrived in seconds. Autopay disabled. Card removed. I repeated the ritual with the gas account, the internet, and the water. Each time the same questions, the same confirmations. By the time I finished, my inbox held a stack of fresh emails, all stamped with the date. I moved them into a folder labeled Proof. The coincidence did not escape me. The next due dates for the mortgage, the gas, the power, the internet, all fell within the week of Thanksgiving. Payments scheduled to leave my account just as they sat down to eat. Without my autopay, the systems would wait for money that never arrived. Notices would go out, services would stop. Not instantly, not like flipping a switch, but with a steady precision built into the rules of finance. I would not lift a hand against them, I would simply step aside. I opened a fresh notebook, one I had bought months ago and never touched. On the first page, I wrote a list. Mortgage $1,550 due November 25th. Electric $340 due November 24th. Gas $128 due November 26th. Internet $95 due November 23. Each line marked with the amount and the due date. At the bottom, I wrote one word in capital letters, stop. I stared at the list until the numbers blurred. My hand ached from pressing the pen too hard. I underlined each date once then, twice then closed the book. I leaned back in my chair and let the room settle around me. The hum of the heater filled the silence. I imagined the house on Willow Bend, its lights glowing, the oven running. The Wi-Fi feeding Caroline's live stream, every piece powered by accounts that had my name on top. I imagined what would happen when those accounts stopped paying. Not my problem anymore, I whispered to the empty room. The clock on the wall ticked past 9. I made coffee, though it was late because I needed the ritual. The sound of the drip, the smell filling the kitchen, the mug warm in my hands. I carried it back to the desk and opened my inbox again. I clicked each confirmation email one by one and saved them as PDFs. Mortgage autopay disabled. Electric autopay disabled. Gas autopay disabled. Internet autopay disabled. Each file slid into the frozen accounts folder, lining up with the others. The folder had grown heavy. Mortgage scans, utility receipts, screenshots of Kayla's captions, Tammy's audio. Now the confirmation files, a complete record of what I had carried and what I had chosen to end. I pushed the chair back and walked to the window. Outside the parking lot, lights buzzed under the night sky. A couple walked to their car with grocery bags, their breath clouding in the cold air. The world moved on, ordinary and unaware. Inside my apartment, the silence shifted. It no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like preparation. I returned to the table and picked up the notebook again. On the next page, I wrote a sentence. Tonight, I stopped. The ink bled slightly into the paper. I closed the book and set it on top of the laptop. As the night deepened, I checked each account one last time, making sure the changes had held. Mortgage autopay off. Utilities cards removed. Internet manual payment only. Each screen confirmed what I had done. The quiet of finality settled in. By midnight, my shoulders ached from hunching over the desk. I stood stretched and turned off the lamp. The laptop screen dimmed to black, the icons of the frozen accounts folder fading into the reflection of my own face. I left the notebook open on the table, the page with stop underlined twice. I brushed my teeth and moved through the apartment with the soft movements of someone who knows the walls well. When I lay down, the room was dark except for the faint light of the street lamp outside. I felt the tension in my chest shift. The choice was made. Not loud, not dramatic, but deliberate. The next morning would come with emails and tasks and maybe more silence from my family. But tonight, on the eve of Thanksgiving, Every switch had been flipped in the only place that mattered. The flow of money had stopped. I closed my eyes and let the stillness hold me. Thanksgiving morning came quiet and clean. I woke without an alarm, made coffee in the small kitchen, and stood at the window while the sky shifted from pale blue to a clear, Austin gold. The building was still. Someone down the hall had propped their door with a grocery bag. The smell of cinnamon floated out and then faded. I scrambled 2 eggs, toasted bread, and ate at the table with the radio off. The silence felt new. It did not ache, it waited. I washed the plate, set it to dry, and opened my notebook. The list of due dates sat where I had left it. Mortgage, electric, gas, internet, each line with a number and a day. I ran a finger under the words and felt the steadiness of a plan that did not require another person to agree with it. Then I closed the book and put it back in the drawer. By early afternoon, I took a walk around the block. The air had a cool edge that Austin does not always get in November. A family on the first floor carried a foil pan to their car and laughed when a child tried to peek under the lid. I passed a coffee shop with a handwritten sign that said, "Open until 2. Inside, a barista stacked pastries into a plastic bin and waved at a couple, holding paper cups. I kept moving. I did not need anything. Back home, I set a pot of water to boil for pasta and opened a jar of sauce I had made and frozen in September. The heat clicked on and off with a hollow sound from the vents. At 3, my phone buzzed. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. When the third vibration rolled across the table, I reached for it. A message from Kayla sat at the top with 3 words and no punctuation. Power went out. Another came right behind it from Nathan. The house is dark. A photo followed. The dining room was lit by a few weak candles, long shadows over the plates that I had bought years ago. I felt my breath catch and then settle. Messages piled up. Someone said the oven stopped and the turkey was half done. Someone else said the space heaters would not turn on, and the little kids were crying. Caroline wrote in the cousin's thread and asked if anyone knew the number to call because Mom had waited on hold and then had been told the account could not process a payment. The words came fast and jagged. I scrolled until the screen blurred. I set the phone down and stirred the pasta. The steam washed my face. The smell of tomato and garlic lifted into the room and eased the tightness in my shoulders. I twisted the burner off and poured the water into the sink. The sound filled the small space, and then it was quiet again. The screen lit. A message from Caroline appeared short and sharp. She asked if I had done something to the accounts. She said the card for catering was declined and the delivery driver had left. I felt a small cold line draw across my chest and then fade. I did not reply. There was nothing to say that the system had not already said for me. Another message from Kayla arrived. She wrote that Mom was crying, that Dad was on the phone with a representative, that the person had used words that made the room go silent. Primary account holders disabled automatic payments. Service pending restoration upon successful payment. I read it twice. The phrasing sounded exactly like every email I had received from the utilities over the years. It was almost comforting in its blandness. The phone rang. Dad. I watched his name stutter across the screen and let it pass to voicemail. The phone rang again. I let it go. A third time. I turned the ringer to silent and set the device face down. I carried my bowl to the couch and ate slowly with my feet tucked under. The food was simple and warm. Outside, a car door slammed and a burst of laughter floated up from the lot. For a moment, I pictured the scene at Willow Bend. People gathering coats, someone fumbling with a flashlight app, the long sigh of the refrigerator winding down, all the background music that had always been invisible to them falling away at once. I felt a flicker of guilt and let it pass through me like a gust of cold air. Guilt belongs to someone who has done wrong. I had only stopped doing an unpaid job. The phone buzzed again. Tammy this time. She wrote that the room was chaotic, that Brian kept asking if anyone had a card they could use for a rush bill payment, that Mom tried to calm everyone and then had sat down hard at the head of the table. Tammy said Dad had stepped onto the porch and was speaking into the phone, in the measured tone he uses when he wants to sound reasonable. She said no one was laughing now. I asked if she was safe. She answered that she was fine, and in a guest room with the door mostly closed. She added that she was sorry it had come to this and then corrected herself. She wrote that she was sorry it took this long. I thanked her and told her she did not need to explain. She sent a small update a few minutes later. Guests were leaving. Someone had taken a pie and placed it back into a box. Someone had blown out candles with a single breath and the room had smelled of wax. The phone vibrated on the table with a string of new messages in the cousins' chat. Nathan wrote that the catering driver was not coming back and that the card the family expected to use did not work. Kayla asked if there was a neighbor with a generator. Caroline said she had tried to go live and the internet was out and the comments were already asking what happened. She said they needed to fix this now. She said my name. She said I needed to answer. I unlocked the phone and typed a short reply to Tammy only. I told her I would not engage in a group argument and that if she needed anything she could call me. She sent a thumbs up made out of simple text, no image attached. Another call from Dad rolled to voicemail, followed by a message that the representative had told him the account holder had disabled payments and removed all cards and that service would resume once the balance was posted. He said we need to talk. He did not use please. He did not apologize. He stayed with us and needed to talk. The old tools he had always used to pull me back into place. I turned the phone face down again and washed my bowl. The water ran hot and I watched the steam drift. When the sink was empty, I wiped the counter with slow strokes until it shone. The simple work gave my hands something to do while my head steadied around the noise of the afternoon. I made tea and carried the mug to the couch. Outside, the sky went lavender and then gray. Somewhere a siren wailed and faded. I thought about the years I had covered every bill with the certainty that holidays went smoother when money did not cause embarrassment. I thought about how no one had asked where the money came from because it was easier to believe in a bottomless well than in a person who could get tired. Messages kept coming, but I stopped reading them in real time. I let them stack. Panic has a rhythm and a volume, and both were familiar to me. The cousin who always jokes was suddenly helpful. The aunt who is usually kind went silent. Caroline tried to keep control of the room and then tried to control the narrative. Dad changed tactics and sent a calmer message about family staying together through difficulty. Mom wrote once in a short line that said she wished I would come home. I looked at that one longer and then set the phone down as if it were heavy. When the apartment slipped into full dark, I turned on a single lamp and let the soft circle of light hold the room. I breathed in and out and felt my heartbeat slow. The world outside moved on. A neighbor carried a trash bag out and a truck pulled into the lot with a low growl. Inside my place, everything worked because I had paid my own bills. The heater clicked and the tea cooled and the quiet felt earned. I checked my email before bed. A handful of automated notices had arrived during the afternoon. Autopay disabled confirmed. An attempt to process a payment had failed. A message that past due status would begin at midnight if no payment was posted. Each line sat there in corporate language, impersonal and precise. I saved them to the folder and closed the laptop. The phone buzzed one more time as I turned off the lamp. I did not look. I set the phone on the nightstand with the screen down and pulled the blanket up to my chin. The room settled. The last things I heard were the soft click of the heater and the muffled sound of a car door closing. I let my eyes fall shut and let the day draw a line. Tomorrow will be clearer. I woke to a string of notifications that stacked across my lock screen. Before I could turn off the alarm, the first was from the Austin Chronicle. The headline used steady words that did not shout. David Reed steps down from leading the neighborhood Thanksgiving charity. Dinner after questions about finances. I opened the link and read it twice. The piece was careful. It said the nonprofit board had accepted his resignation, that they appreciated his years of service, that an internal review was underway. It did not name me. It did not need to. I knew which invoices and screenshots the reporter had examined because I had organized them in a folder until the story made sense. I typed the reporter's name into my email and found a message waiting. She thanked me for confirming the authenticity of the documents and said she would not identify me. She added that the nonprofit had already removed photos from last year's event. I clicked to the group's website and watched the gallery load. The page looked like a mouth with a few missing teeth. Pictures I remembered had become blank spaces. The board roster no longer carried my father's name. Another alert buzzed. A friend who works in marketing texted a link to a community forum where people were discussing what had happened at the house on Willow Bend. The tone was turning. For years, the story had been about generosity and tradition. Now commenters wondered aloud why a family with means could not keep the lights on during a holiday dinner. I closed the tab before the rubbernecking made me tired. Before lunch, the phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail and listened a minute later. A man introduced himself as a compliance officer from the bank where Brian works. He said they were reviewing an audio file circulated to the branch and asked if I could verify its contents. He stressed that the inquiry was routine. The words routine and compliance do not fit well in the same sentence. I called back and kept it short. I said the recording was accurate, that it reflected a discussion about keeping my name on a loan for convenience. He asked if I wanted to add anything. I said I had provided everything relevant to the reporter at the Chronicle and that I had nothing further. He thanked me in a voice that sounded like paper being folded and hung up. Tammy texted seconds later as if she could feel the call from across town. She said Brian had been asked not to come in for a while. Administrative leave was the phrase she used. She said Caroline was pacing their kitchen, talking about narratives and damage control, trying to draft a post that would make the day sound like a misunderstanding. Tammy added that Mom had cried in the morning and then apologized to a neighbor who had arrived yesterday with a casserole after the lights failed. Uncle Tom had driven home early and told everyone he was done fixing other people's messes. I poured coffee and stood by the window as a delivery truck rattled down the street. The city had resumed its normal rhythm. A cyclist balanced a baguette under one arm. A child dragged a scooter across the sidewalk and laughed at nothing I could see. I pressed the mug to my chest and let the heat hold me steady. None of this felt triumphant. It felt like gravity in a world that had been slightly tilted for a long time. By early afternoon, my phone was a small storm. On Instagram, Caroline's reel from last week was filled with comments that did not match her caption. People asked why she had credited a bakery and a florist but never the person who supplied the table settings that kept appearing in her photos year after year. A few kind followers suggested that social media is imperfect and that sometimes we forget to tag. Others were not as gentle. A brand she partners with paused a giveaway, leaving a note that they support transparency in content. I watched the follower count dip by a few hundred and then held my breath. When it fell again, watching numbers change did not make me feel better. It only reminded me of how easily a public story can come unstitched. The reporter called in the late afternoon and asked for a final confirmation before her follow-up went live. She read a line where she described years of household expenses paid by a co-borrower who was not on the deed. She said legal sources had confirmed that a co-borrower has no ownership rights simply because a name appears on a loan. I said that was correct. She asked if I wanted to be identified as a source. I said no. She promised accuracy and hung up. 10 minutes later, an updated piece appeared. The writing was brisk and clean. There was a small box in the middle of the article titled, "What to Know," about co-signing. I read it all the way through even though I already knew it. The box ended with a sentence that said, "The bank cares about repayment." Not family dynamics. The truth sat there without blinking. Tammy sent another message longer this time. She wrote that the house felt like after a storm. She said Dad had used his calm voice until the board's statement went public, and then his shoulders dropped in a way she had not seen before. She said Mom sat in the den with a cold cloth over her eyes and would not let anyone take a photo of her for Caroline's feed. She said Caroline had tried to record a video explaining that life gets messy, but comments flooded in too quickly and she took it down. Tammy ended with a line that surprised me. She said she was proud of me. I told her the only thing I had done was stop paying for a story that harmed me. She said that sometimes stopping is the bravest thing. Near dusk, the bank officer called again. He said the branch had placed Brian on leave during their review. He repeated that the decision was temporary. I thanked him for the courtesy of the update. He did not ask me any more questions. I could hear keys clacking in the background and the low murmur of a printer, the sound of a system resetting itself around a new fact. I made a simple dinner and ate at the counter while refreshing the Chronicle page more than I should have. The article had picked up a few comments from readers who knew my parents. From church. Most were kind in a distant way. A few were sharp. I closed the tab and brushed crumbs into my palm. I do not enjoy watching people pick through my life, even when they land on the right conclusions. In the evening, my mother sent a message that was only a few words. She said she felt sick. She said this was humiliating. She did not ask how I was. I held the phone and thought about replying with a sentence that would not ignite another flare. I set the phone down instead. Silence is a sentence when you have said everything that matters and no one listened. I took the folder on my desktop and reviewed it like a checklist. Mortgage receipts, utility confirmations, the audio transcript. Screenshots of public posts, emails from vendors and banks and the reporter. It looked orderly now. The folder had started as a shield. Today it felt like a record that could stand without me. The weight in my chest shifted, not relief, not yet. Just a sense that the story had moved out of the shadows where it fed on me and into the light where it could stand on its own. Night settled over Austin in a clean way. The street lights clicked on. An owl lifted off the branch of the oak by the parking lot and drifted, out of view. I rinsed my mug and set it upside down on the rack. The phone quieted for the first time all day. I stood at the window and let the dark glass hold my reflection. I felt lined up with the facts. My father had stepped away from a role that built his reputation on the back of my money. My brother-in-law would answer his employer about words he had spoken, freely in a room that felt safe to him. My sister would look at her public pages and decide how much reality she could tolerate. None of that belonged to me to manage. I turned from the window and switched off the lamp. The apartment went soft and still. Tomorrow I will take the next step that belongs to me. Tonight I allowed the pieces to sit where they had fallen and did not touch them. The Sunday after Thanksgiving, I drove to Willow Bend with the window cracked and the radio off. The air still held the faint smell of burned leaves, and someone nearby was grilling late the smoke low and sweet. The house looked the same from the street, brick steady. Porch light off in the weak morning sun. I parked at the curb and sat for a breath until my hands steadied on the wheel. Then I walked up the path with a manila folder tucked under my arm. Dad opened the door before I could knock. He had that school administrator posture he uses when he wants the room to behave. We stood on the porch because I asked to keep it outside. He said we could talk for 5 minutes. I did not argue about minutes. I told him I would keep it simple. I said I am done paying the mortgage. 5 years, over $90,000. I am calling it what it was in my heart, a way of honoring what you and Mom gave me. From today forward, if you want to keep the house, you will handle the payments. He stared at me as if I had switched to a language he did not speak. Then the words came fast. He said this is reckless. He said the bank relies on my credit. He said no adult decides to walk away from a commitment when other people are counting on her. He said I would destroy my own credit if a payment is missed. He asked if that is really what I want. I let him finish. I told him I am not asking the bank to remove me. I know they will not without a refinance or assumption. I am not changing the loan. I am stopping voluntary payments. There is a difference. I told him he could talk to the lender about options that put the obligation where it belongs. I slid the folder open and showed him a 1-page summary. Dates, amounts, confirmation numbers. My handwriting across the bottom said paid by Camila. He did not look at the paper. He said I was making a scene and punishing my mother. He said families help each other without keeping score. He said what I was doing would shame him in the neighborhood. He said I should think about what people will say when they learn I forced a house into trouble. I kept my voice level. I said people are already talking because of things you decided without me. I said help is not invisible servitude. I said I have been quiet for years and nothing changed except the weight on my back. I told him again there would be no more payments from me. I offered to leave a note acknowledging that I had informed him today, so there would be no claim of surprise. He waved his hand and told me to take my paperwork and my attitude and stop grandstanding on the porch like a politician. He turned as if to end the meeting. Norma Fisher walked by with her small dog at that moment, headed toward the mailbox cluster. She gave me a gentle nod and kept going. Dad saw her too and pressed his jaw. He told me to come inside. I said no. He said I was being dramatic. I said I was being clear. He said he would be contacting the bank and a lawyer. I told him he should. I said I had one of my own. He told me I was not welcome in the house, and I said I understood. Then I put the summary back in the folder and told him I would send everything certified so there would be a record. He started to say something else, then stopped. He opened the door, stepped inside, and closed it with more strength than was necessary. I stood on the porch for a count of 10 so my breathing could catch up to me. Then I walked back to the car and sat until the shaking in my hands ebbed. Downtown later that afternoon, Daniel Miller's office sat above a title company with a bell on the door that rang politely when I entered. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and clean paper. Daniel shook my hand not too hard and asked me to tell him everything since our last call in plain language. I did. I laid the folder on his desk and slid out the items one by one. The payment summary. Copies of the loan documents showing Dad as owner and me as co-borrower. The printouts of confirmations. the emails from the utility companies confirming auto-pay disabled and cards removed. He scanned quickly, then slowed on the loan. He said, "This is exactly what we expected. The bank is not going to remove a co-borrower because the borrower is tired. The bank cares about being paid. If your father can refinance into his own name, that is the cleanest path. If the lender offers an assumption with a formal release, that is the other option. There is also novation, less common but possible at some lenders. Without one of those, your name stays on that obligation even if you never pay another cent." I told him I understood. I said I was willing to accept the risk to my credit rather than continue paying for a house I do not own and am not welcome in. I asked how to protect myself as much as possible while taking that position. He said, "We will send a letter by certified mail to the lender and to the loan servicer stating that you have ceased voluntary payments as of today, and that any requests for payment should be directed to the owner and primary borrower David Reed at his address. We will request that all statements and notices go to both of you and that any autopay previously tied to your accounts is revoked." He said this does not relieve you, but it documents your stance. He said we will send a separate letter to your father, also certified, giving him 90 days to pursue refinance or an approved assumption, and advising that you will not resume payments. He said we can propose a harmless agreement in which he promises to indemnify you for any losses related to the mortgage caused by his non-payment. He looked up and added that he cannot force your father to sign that, but it is worth putting in front of him. I asked about utilities. He said close anything in your name or transfer it to the owner if it's provider requires continuity of service. Do not leave any payment method on file. Keep copies of every change and every notice. Create a log. He laid a retainer on the desk for a limited scope representation, and I signed. He drafted the letters while I waited, his typing steady, the language precise without being theatrical. He asked for my initials on each page and my signature at the end. He printed envelopes with the lender's payment processing address and the correspondence address, so there would be no excuse about misdirection. He handed me the stack to read. The words said exactly what I needed them to say. I approved every line. He asked if I wanted to attach any exhibits. I said include the one-page payment summary and a copy of the loan. Showing ownership fields, he nodded. He added the exhibits and stapled everything neatly. He said his assistant would take the letters to the post office before 5 and email me the tracking numbers. He said keep logging. He said if the lender calls, do not volunteer more than what is in the letter. He said if my father contacts me, refer him to his own lender or to counsel. I sat back and let the chair hold me for a moment. I told him I did not expect relief. I expected alignment. He said alignment is the quiet side of justice. It does not feel like fireworks. It feels like a door closing that should have been closed all along. He said take care of your own accounts, keep your job steady, and let the consequences rest where they belong. When I stepped outside, the late afternoon light over Austin had gone soft. Office workers carried paper bags of takeout toward cars. A bus sighed at the curb and pulled away. I held the envelopes he had given me, duplicates for my files, and felt their weight, not heavy, exact. Back at my apartment, I set the copies in the frozen accounts folder and sent myself an email with a short note listing the date and time of the porch conversation and that Norma had passed by while we spoke. I saved it and printed a copy for the binder I had started. I put the binder on the shelf next to my lease and my tax returns. Things that anchor a life. The phone was quiet for once. I made rice and a quick stir-fry and ate at the counter. I pictured Dad at the dining room table, glasses lined up by the sink, the house still and clean and waiting. I did not wish him ill. I wished him honest choices. I rinsed the pan and let it air dry. The lamp in the corner threw a warm circle across the floor. I sat with tea and looked at the notebook page that said stop. The ink had bled a little where I pressed down too hard the night I wrote. The word looked steady now. The plan had a shape that could hold. I closed the book and put it away. Outside, a train horn carried faint and low. Inside, the heater ticked on and hummed. I let the sound settle me. The next steps had been placed. They would move whether I watched them or not. I turned off the light and let the room go still. A week later, Austin felt rinsed by cool air. Porches shimmered with slow, patient lights, and the mornings carried that thin winter sun Texas gets for a few weeks each year. I walked to the corner market for milk and oranges and came back with a small bundle of pine. The smell filled the apartment as I set it in a jar by the window. I opened my laptop and checked what needed checking. Certified mail receipts from Daniel had landed overnight with tidy, Tracking numbers, lender received, servicer received, my father received. I saved the attachments and closed the computer. Order did its work and did not need an audience. Coffee burbled in the kitchen. While it brewed, I stacked a few papers on the table and built a slim binder the way I build budgets at work. 3 tabs with plain names: mortgage, utilities, legal, no drama tucked inside, only what mattered. I wrote a date on the spine and slid it between my lease and last year's taxes. It looked like it had always belonged there. My phone buzzed. A short message from Mom read that we are still family. A minute later, Dad added that we should talk. I let the screen dim. It was not anger that kept me from answering. It was a promise I had made to myself that I would not re-enter rooms where the price of admission was my self-respect. The apartment was quiet in a new way, not hollow, clear. I cracked the window and let a ribbon of cold air move the curtains. A neighbor carried a paper bag down the hall and hummed a tune I almost recognized. I chopped onions and carrots for soup and listened to the knife find its rhythm. The smell rose warm from the pot and softened the edges of the day. Daniel called just before noon with the voice he uses for fax. The servicer had logged our letter. The path was unchanged. Refinance or assumption if my father wanted the loan in his own name. Keep copies of every notice. Do not volunteer more than what the letter already says. We ended the call in under 5 minutes. Clarity likes brevity. I ate by the window and watched a boy across the street dribble a basketball that kept escaping to the curb. He chased it, laughing at himself each time. The ordinary scene steadied me. There are days when peace looks like nothing at all. You almost miss it because it does not wave its arms. Afternoon drifted through small chores. Sweep the kitchen. Wipe the bathroom mirror. Fold laundry and stack it by color because order feels like prayer when you have been living inside somebody else's chaos. The phone tapped the table a few times and then gave up. I did not look. Toward evening, I walked to the mailbox. Norma was there with her tiny dog in a sweater the color of toast. She asked how I was, and I said steady. She nodded like a teacher who had been waiting for the right answer. She said there would be oatmeal cookies on my doormat later and that I was free to ignore the sugar and take only the gesture. I laughed and promised her I would take both. On my way back, she said that doors are not only for leaving things out, they are also for keeping the right things in. I carried her sentence up the stairs like a small lamp. An email from the neighborhood nonprofit waited when I returned. A new committee would organize this year's dinner, and they thanked the community for patience. I read it once and filed it away. The line landed with the quiet click of a lid that finally fit. I turned on one lamp and let the corner glow. Then I took the small notebook from the drawer, the one with a page near the front where I had written the word stop. I flipped to a clean page and wrote start. I wrote start caring for what is mine with the same precision I once poured into a house where I was a ghost. Start choosing my peace over someone else's comfort. Start asking what this will cost me and whether it should. The page stayed simple. It did not need decoration to be true. The phone lit again. Mom repeated that we are still family. The words had a familiar shape that leaned on blood because the rest had failed. I set the phone down. Love without boundaries is not love. It is access. I hoped we would find a kinder version of ourselves someday. Today I would not pay to enter the old one. I washed the pot and left it to dry. I wiped the counter and let the room breathe. Onion pine, a hint of soap. I lowered the blinds halfway and stood still for a moment. A small life can feel like a refuge once it truly belongs to you. Night laid itself across the city in soft layers. A bus sighed at the corner. Someone in the building laughed and a door closed gently. I opened the laptop to a blank page and began to speak on paper to the people who would hear this. If you have ever been the one who kept the bills paid and the lights steady while someone else collected the praise, I see you. If you have carried a family because they called it love, and then called you cold when you asked for fairness, I know the ache in your throat. Stopping is not cruelty. It is a boundary that steals back your breath. Choosing peace is not abandonment. It is stewardship of the one life you get to keep. I let those lines stand and added what I needed to ask. Tell me where you are listening from and tell me the door you had to close so your own house could be calm. Share the moment you set down the chore that was never yours. Share what you learned when you replaced silence with proof. If this story met you at a table where you had no chair, add your voice so we can shape a better table here. Subscribe if you want more of these honest receipts and leave a comment. Naming the boundary you chose. Sometimes the first time you say it out loud is the first time it holds. I saved the file and closed the computer. The lamp cast a gentle circle and the apartment settled around it. The binder on the shelf stood between my lease and my taxes like any other fact of my life. I turned off the light and lay down, listening to the heater click and fade. The quiet did not feel empty. It felt earned. Outside, a car door closed and footsteps crossed the lot. Inside my place, the steady glow stayed steady, and I did not brace for it to go out.